You're tuned in to Getting to the Root of It, focusing on healing and letting go of the wounds of addiction and other unresolved traumas of the past. Your breakthrough begins with you. Are you ready to change your life? Stay tuned as your host, expert therapist, personal development coach, and spiritual cheerleader, Natashah Khan, inspires you to live the life you were destined to live.
Hi, everyone, and this is Natashah Khan, your host of Getting to the Root of It, and I am so excited to be here tonight. Last week, when I shared on my last episode, when we were talking about cognitive distortions and stinking thinking, I told you guys, I gave you a sneak preview that we were going to have a special guest. I did not give you guys her name. I did not want to give away the secret, but she is here with me today, and it is Dr. Nicole Ouzounian. For those of you that are familiar with that name, she's also known as Dr. No, as we all have grown to love her. So she is with me today, and the reason why I've asked her to be on the show is because she has spent about 20 years in this field working in addiction. She's had both personal experiences and professional experiences surrounding the illness. And as you guys know, I have about 25 years in the field. So with working with Nicole, we have a plethora of education and information that we want to share with the world. For years that we've been working together, we've been wanting to make sure that the world understands what addiction is. And we're part of what she likes to refer as ambassadors for God. She wants us to step out there as soldiers and be able to guide other people into healing and to living a better life. So I won't keep you in suspense any longer. I'm gonna have her give you her introduction, tell you a little bit about herself, where she's from, and like what brought her into this field. And then we're gonna just kind of take it from there. So Nicole, welcome.
Hi, Natasha. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And hi, everybody. It's really an honor to be able to do this with you. And I thank you so much for asking me to, share information that I do believe the universe kind of wants us to get out there. I think we're evolving, and that also includes, the field of addiction is evolving, and there's more information, getting out there that may not be your traditional cookie cutter information, which is very important. But what I've noticed in the time that I've, kind of been involved in this industry, in this field, is that this is way more than just a logical phenomenon. I've had some pretty, I'm going to just use the word creepy experiences myself that kind of opened my eyes and enlightened me to the idea that there may be more than going on than meets the eye. And when we kind of put a mind-altering substance inside of our sacred space, it kind of opens more doors. So my goal really of getting into this industry, and as I've evolved in it, is to truly help change the stigma of addiction, help individuals and people understand that it's more than just a moral issue, and recognize that, to be honest with you, it is a true spiritual path. And the reason I say that it's a true spiritual path is because people who normally have an addictive personality generally are empathic, they're extremely intuitive, they're very smart, they're resilient, they're adaptable, they have razor sharp focus. So these are what I call very warrior-esque type qualities. And the reality of it is sometimes, people, get thrown on a path that gets them really intimate with the dark. And I believe the purpose of becoming intimate with the dark is so we can actually become intimate with the light.
Okay, so let me just interrupt you for a second, because I remember when we worked together that you had done a presentation for many of our families who were impacted with addiction, and you were able to enlighten them on this darkness and this light. Can you, and I know you kind of tied that into the 12 steps of the Alcoholics Anonymous, right?
Yes.
I know we may not have time to go through all 12 steps, but can you share with our audience and to our listeners just a little bit more about that darkness and light as it relates to the 12 steps?
Sure. So a lot of people in general, especially new recovering addicts who come into the healing realm, are really afraid of what the 12 steps is. And I basically ask them, most of my students, you know, have you done the 12 steps before? And a lot of them, most of them say, no, I haven't. And I challenge them. I said, well, wait a second. Yes, you have, but you did it on the dark side. And so they look at me like I'm crazy. So I basically explain, when you take step one, and step one is basically, you know, believing that, you know, that your life has become, you're powerless over fill in the blank, and then your life has become unmanageable. So with every step, there is a principle or a virtue or a way of action to live. So with the first step, the principle is honesty, okay? It's not just honest that you recognize you're powerless over whatever, you know, your mind altering substance or whatever addiction or whatever issue you're having that you want to transform. It's also about being honest with everything, and which is a very difficult thing to do for people in general. But if you look at the principle of honesty on the light side of the force, with every yin, there's a yang. So if honesty is on the light side of the force, then when we go to the other side, the opposite of that is honest versus dishonest and manipulation. So when we talk about it, it's like, okay, well, most people who are living an active addict lifestyle, in order to sustain that lifestyle, they have to be dishonest. They have to be manipulative, because it's literally a call of action that is necessary to sustain that lifestyle. I know that sounds weird, but it's the same on the reverse. If you want to live a life of recovery and transformation, you have to be honest. You cannot be honest and dishonest at the same time, because then you're walking two paths.
I'm really glad that you cleared that up, you know, because I'm sure some listeners are saying out there, what do you mean they have to be dishonest, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important for people to understand the lifestyle in which you're in.
Yes.
Right. And if you're living in that addict lifestyle, you're absolutely right. It's, you know, my sponsor used to always say to me that fear and faith can't dwell in the same household. So your dishonesty and your honesty can't dwell in the same place.
Correct. Well, let's even get a little bit more specific, because I know it can be confusing for people who are hearing this for the first time. Think of it as literally living in two different dimensions with two different laws, two different rules, two different ways of being. And literally in this dimension, there are very specific rules and regulations you have to follow in order to be successful on this path. In this dimension, which would be the active addict dimension, there's the same thing, rules and specific laws that you have to follow. And this is going to sound weird, but rules and you have to follow that will make you successful on that path. Let's take the judgment out, right? You're either going to be successful over here or you're going to be successful over here, depending on which side you're tapping into. If you look at step two, right? Believing that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. Well, if there's a power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity, there's a power greater than yourself that can restore you to insanity. You can't have a yin without a yang.
Absolutely.
Right? So the principle for step two is basically having faith. You're having faith that something beyond your level of understanding can provide what is necessary for you to fully evolve on whichever path you're following. So here we go. Now we have honesty on the recovery path, and now we have faith on the recovery path. On the addiction path, we have dishonesty, right? And manipulation, and now we're going to be faithless. So we can already see the patterns, and we can even go to step three, right? Giving your will over to the care of God as you understand him is basically trust. Now, God can be whatever you make God to be. God is a man-made word, right? How we, you know, represent God or how we believe in God is a very individualized process. But, you know, God over here could be, you know, a higher power. It could be a divine being. It could be whatever is providing you with the positive energy to move forward in an enlightened state. So over here, right, on the other side, it's basically not trusting. So we have trust over here with the principle of step three. And on the other side, I'm not trusting. I'm not going to trust people. I'm not going to trust systems. I'm not going to trust, that there is anything. But what they don't understand is that you're going to connect on either side. You're either connecting to a power greater than you that's going to restore you to sanity, or you're going to connect with a power greater than you that's going to restore you to insanity.
So then technically you are trusting something on the other
Correct.
side, right?
Well, let's get even a little bit deeper with that. If you think about it, when you have a struggling active addict who has no money, is in active withdrawal, is extremely sick, no resources, no car, homeless, and you think, how are they going to be able to sustain a $500 to $1,000 a day habit with none of these resources? Yet somehow they're able to get up, of course, and they can sustain it. They're not doing that by themselves.
Right.
They're connecting to something that is giving them power, right, to be able to sustain that lifestyle.
Just unfortunately, it's self-destructive.
Oh, of course.
Right.
But this is what I always say to my students, are like, well, what do you mean by higher power? Higher power doesn't exist. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Well, you did it on the other side. And you trusted, and you had that razor sharp focus that you were going to get what you needed to get, right? No matter what. So if you can do that on this side, it's the understanding is that, well, if I can do it over here, I can do it over here, right?
So let me ask you this. How can the families, first of all, the way that you've explained it makes a lot of sense. I understand it. And I hope that my listeners are understanding it as well. When families have been hurt so much by that lifestyle, right? And where there's no trust, and where they've taken the path of self-destruction. And as a result, that self-destruction has impacted their families. What words of wisdom, or what can you share with our families? How do our families heal and forgive that lifestyle that they've been living that comes with that lack of faith and comes with that lack of trust of doing the next right thing?
Okay, great question. So the first thing I have to kind of preface is that addiction is not a logical phenomenon. You cannot put it in a little box and say, if you do this, 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 and this, you're going to be fine. And let's even go deeper with that. All right. If this is the mind altering substance, right? People are willing to give up family, money, health, morality, loved ones, jobs, homes, cars, everything for this. Yet they struggle to give up this to have everything. It doesn't make sense. If people were able to just put the mind-altering substances down, right? 99.9% of the people who are in treatment who are in a position to where actually they were wanting to transform their soul would be able to do it. Absolutely. So we cannot look at it in a logical way. So the interesting thing about people who struggle with addiction is I truly believe they're called the chosen ones. And the reason I call them the chosen ones is because there's very few life paths where one literally has two paths to choose from. Whereas normal people, or whatever normal is, but we'll just use that word for,
it's
whatever. Right. They have an infinite amount of paths that they can choose from, right? They may not, be in alignment with their destiny. They may not be living the life of their wildest dreams, but they're not necessarily going to die. Addicts literally have two paths. And for someone to accept that and to come into a realization that I'm either going to become enlightened or I'm going to die is a very difficult concept to receive, right?
Very true.
And so what people are called to do who struggle with addiction is they're called to literally evolve into the highest state of self possible. And it is through, the process of learning, what addiction is, what kind of spiritual concepts may be involved. They have to change everything from the internal self, right? The internal self has to be addressed. And most people, especially in our culture, we are not taught to focus on our internal self. We are taught to focus on the external. So when basically someone has this moment of clarity, when they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I don't want to live this way anymore, right? What happens is that is when the transformational process begins, okay? And so there's a quote I'm going to say that's going to kind of tie into everything, because this is what happens to an addict when they have that realization that I don't want to live this way anymore. That is the beginning. So the quote is, and it's not mine, but I totally forget who said it, so bear with me. It goes, once the soul awakens, the search begins and you can never go back. From then on, you are inflamed with a longing that will never again let you live in the lowlands of complacency and partial fulfillment. From then on, you are loath to let compromise interfere with your destiny.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, let's press pause and let's just say, wow.
Yeah, that's a lot.
There's a lot to that quote. It almost seems like something that Don Miguel Ruiz would say.
Yeah.
Thinking of the words right now.
Let's even look at the first sentence, right? Because here's where it begins. Here's where, okay, they're ready. They're ready to start receiving. Once the soul awakens, well, what that looks like is that looks like someone putting out into the universe, help me. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this. That's when the soul awakens. Once the soul awakens, the search begins and you can never go back, which means, go ahead.
If I can interject for a second, and that is true for the families as well, right? When the families get to that place and they say, you know what, I'm exhausted. I don't know what else to do. I give up.
Yes.
Right?
It's important for family members to understand that the particular path of someone who is truly struggling with addiction is very spiritual. They've already tapped into different dimensions that most people never, ever, ever have seen, experienced, knew they were there. It's a whole other world. They've actually seen hell. Okay. So it's a very specific path of taking someone, right, who doesn't understand the depths of addiction, right? The layers of addiction, the spirituality of addiction, right? And what addicts are called to do on this life path, right? And so once you start educating, you know, people who are struggling with addiction or even their families on the complexity, right, of training the mind, right, and mastering the mind to a place to where you recognize your spirit is bigger than your mind.
Now that's a great segue into what we talked about last week on my last episode. I talked a lot about cognitive distortions. I talked a lot about how trauma and life experiences impact the mindset. So can you elaborate on that with the last, you know, we have about another 10 to 15 minutes on our show. Can you elaborate and speak a little bit more on helping people understand how that mindset, that perspective is an intricate part of this whole addiction process?
Yes. So let's go way back, right, to when we first came into this world, right? Literally when we came out of our mother's belly and we entered this world. And some theorists believe that when we first come into this world, we're the closest to our true self that we're ever going to be, because we haven't yet been molded into what our culture, our society, and our teachers expect of us, as well as our experiences. So as we evolve in this world, you know, if you're a girl, you get put in pink. If you're a boy, you get put in blue. If you're a girl, you get dolls for toys. If you're a boy, you get trucks. And what happens is this creates identities. This creates a persona of what is expected of you. Throw in being a kid in school, getting bullied, conflicts going on in the home, all of these other things, is literally we get further and further away from our true self. And what happens when we get further and further away from our true selves, right? We start acting in ways that are not in alignment with our true soul. And this is when the conflict happens. So the definition, a real simple definition of conflict, is two opposing views, right? So if I'm having if I'm behaving in a way that it's just not feeling right, because I know it's not in alignment with my true soul, or I'm feeling something's off, I'm going to have what they call intrapersonal conflict. Intrapersonal conflict is an internal conflict that people have when basically it's time for transformation to occur. Because there would be no conflict if someone was okay with the behaviors.
So let me ask you something in alignment with that. And this kind of correlates and ties into the episode that I did last week. Growing up as a child, because of the abuse that I endured, I grew up believing that I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
But at my core, even though I couldn't put my finger on it, there was a part of me that didn't believe that to be true.
Sure.
Does that classify as interpersonal conflict?
100%. The external world has taught you something, that created an idea of who you are, an identity of who you were. But there's something deeper than that. There's your soul. There's that internal knowing that, no, wait a second, I'm more than this. Mm-hmm. I know I'm more than this. But here's when the conflict starts to happen, because I identify myself as this, but I feel that I might be different than how I'm identifying myself. But if we take it even a little bit further, once we start creating our identity, what we'll do is we'll start believing other individuals who are categorized in that same group, which is now called group identification. So now I'm feeling like, okay, I was abused. I'm not good enough. People are disrespectful. Nobody loves me, right? I'm a loner. I isolate. I'm an addict. All these things that are now my identity. So what happens is I start to take on the characteristics of the group I'm identifying with, even if I don't want to. That's how powerful group identification is.
I agree.
So at the core of transformation, to be honest with you, what has to happen is we have to die, really. Sure. Our identity has to be completely refurbished, right? So our old identity has to die. And when that happens, people go through a grieving process, right? And if you've ever had, unfortunately, someone who you deeply, 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 deeply cared about who has crossed over or passed on, we grieve, right? It's something, or someone that was so important to us. It was, so important to us. And the truth is we can't bring them back. So we go through the stages of grief in a way to where we get to acceptance, hopefully, I don't want to say quickly, but hopefully in a way to where it's a much more flowy, right? When it comes to your identity dying, the reality of it is you're grieving it. You might hit the stage of anger or depression. You can't handle it anymore. And you can actually bring the addiction back into your life. And it's almost like saying, if you could bring your loved one back and they were healthy and they were good to go and it was amazing, right? Chances are you would want to bring them back. But we know we can't because they crossed over.
So I wonder if any of my listeners are wondering the same thing that I'm wondering right now. And what if you don't realize what you just said about I need that identity to die? What if I don't know that I need to have that identity die to form a new identity? Like what
That's why we teach you. That's why I ask two things of my students. The only things I ask is, number one, be a student, and number two, open your mind. Because a lot of this information, especially the spiritual stuff that I talk about, is not really discussed much, especially in the treatment field. Right. Okay. Unfortunately, because it's not tangible, there's not a lot of evidence-based material that normally treatment centers like to utilize, which I get, right? But this is a whole piece of that particular phenomenon that's
missing.
That is missing. I do believe that.
It's missing. No one's talking about it, but guess what? That's what this podcast is for. You get to come here and we get to be able to continue this conversation. And I have to tell you, this has been so enlightening. And it's just so jam-packed just with because there's so much that I can break down with everything that you said today, right? a little bit more, could you add a little bit more on the mindset piece and how with that dying of the identity and this readiness for transformation,
Sure.
why is our mindset so important to, or how does it contribute to the addiction?
Sure. So I use the analogy that your mind is the steering wheel of the path you're on. It literally will take you on this path or this path. Our mind, once it has a thought, creates internal energy, right? So if I'm feeling like a victim, or if I'm feeling resentful, or if I'm feeling, hopeless or helpless, what happens is there's an energy that is created within me, right? And it's a very heavy energy. It almost like feeds the dark side, okay? So we have to alter the mindset, not just of your identity, right? But part of that is what you're capable of doing and how important the purpose of an addict is. Because if you look at it, it's really one of the very few paths where it's an extreme path, right? But there's a double-edged sword to that. Extreme meaning if you choose this path, right, of active addiction, you're going to be in your own personal hell and you will eventually die because that's what it wants, right?
Right.
If we choose the recovery path, right, it's a different vibration. It's a different energy. Being honest, having hope, having faith, having courage, right? All of these amazing principles that go along with the steps. These are very high level, light level energies, right? So if I'm feeling that in me, not only am I feeling that in me, but I'm projecting it out of me. And it's amazing how powerful we are based on our thoughts.
Very true.
So thoughts plus attitude equals behavior, right? So if our thoughts are constantly in a state where I've accepted the fact that I'm going to die an active addict, I've accepted the fact that I'm going to isolate and avoid everything, I've accepted the fact that I'm just going to be angry and I hate the world. This is very, very dangerous, right? But it is part of the process because remember what I said, in order to be intimate with the light, you had to have been intimate with the dark. So it's helping people to understand that, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway. All right, I'm just going to say it. What if, because of the purpose of what truly addicts have to go through, and as far as their ultimate destiny, what if they didn't have a choice on their life path? This is part of their journey, right? It's part of their journey. Most people who are in recovery are healers, are teachers, are servants, are educators, are energy workers, are spiritual guides. You don't just become successful and powerful in that without knowing what you're fighting against.
And I agree with you 100%. And I say it to every family, I said, your loved ones are on this journey, not by accident.
Yeah.
It is purposeful.
Yeah.
And even for those who have lost their lives to this illness, I do not believe that they died in vain.
No.
Even their deaths have purpose, right?
Yeah.
The path that they've been on, it had an impact, it had a ripple effect. And even though they may not be here in the physical sense, spiritually, they continue to deliver a message, to the people that they love, right? Because 100%. Now their families step out and want to make a difference. Yeah. They want to share that word or share that message with other people. Yeah. So I feel like even when that person passes, they're still, like you say, now they're on the path of healing, just in a very, very different way.
Yeah. Do I have time to share a story in relation to that?
Okay. Do.
So I worked with a client. You may remember this client. I'm not going to say the name, but this client literally came into treatment with a tattoo on his chest, basically saying, "I am evil." Right? He was so dark. He came into treatment. He worked in our faith-based program. He made a complete 180 and just became this ball of light all over the community. And I'll never forget, he completed treatment. He went home, and unfortunately he relapsed and he passed away within literally like 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And the whole community was devastated. And I got this this is weird, but sometimes I get feelings. I got this feeling as I was consoling some of the other clients, and it was almost like, wait a second. He was called back into the alternate realm to do the new mission that God has for him. Because when we cross over, some of us believe that your purpose isn't over. It just, you can do things very differently in that realm. So I wholeheartedly believe that this particular spirit, you know, who was a part of my life, is helping other addicts doing what he needs to do in the other realms.
Listen, that is a deep, a deep conversation.
Yeah. You know me.
I believe wholeheartedly, but it's a conversation that I really hope that we get to have another conversation and continue this, because that piece that you just said about, you know, passing on and that spirit going into another realm and still continuing God's purpose. I'm such in awe, because there's not, if people believe that to be true, we're not having conversations about it.
Yeah.
And I think that if people truly did believe that and can accept that and understand it, I think it would allow for, when our loved ones leave this world, for us to be a little bit more accepting. The grieving process would be so much more tolerable, because we understand that this is truly not an end, right?
Correct.
The physical aspect of us might be an end, but there's so much more to us that is still moving on and moving forward. So I really hope that you do get to come back. I would love to have you, that we can continue this conversation. I can't thank you enough for just being here today and being able to share your wisdom and being able to share, you know, so many parts of yourself and your experience in this journey. If there is one thing that you can share with, whether it be individuals struggling with addiction or the families that are impacted by the addiction, anything you want to share or you want to leave them with today before we head out of here?
So it's not just the person struggling with addiction that has a phenomenal purpose. It's also the loved ones. They're part of it. They're part of this spiritual evolution. You know, and if we can just understand, you know, that it truly is a spiritual path, and recognize that all involved with the person who is on this transformative path are part of that path. And if we can recognize that all of this is for the greater good, as long as we can teach people kind of these different kind of, I guess, creepy, if you will, processes, it's like I have seen miracles. I have seen miracles. And the thing of it is that what happens sometimes is we become so accustomed to miracles that we don't even recognize when miracles are occurring.
Very true.
And when you have a client that just is able to sit in your chair and take notes, that's a miracle, right? When you see them, you know, reaching out, that's a miracle. And just know this. When someone is in active addiction, it is not them. They are truly possessed. That's a whole other lecture, yeah. Because they go through a cycle of possession and oppression caused by negative energy. So this fight is a lot bigger than people think it is, a lot bigger. And remember that it's not logical. So really try to be mindful, because logic says, why would you do this? Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to the family? That's logic. It's not logical. It's way beyond that. So that's.
So how can, God, I can sit here and I can talk to you forever. I love our conversations. I miss you so much. I miss working with you. How can, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, tell us a little bit about what you're doing today. Tell us a little bit about your business, and your personal practice, and how people can get in touch with you if they wanted to maybe continue this conversation and learn a little bit more about the, you know, that creepy stuff you were talking about earlier.
So I have it's basically a coaching academy. It's the Chosen Ones Coaching Academy. I focus a lot on spiritual warfare. I focus a lot on getting soldiers prepared for what it is that they're fighting, how to fight it, what to connect with, and how to discern, right, what is trying to call you out. Because a lot of times the dark side uses very specific tactics to try to bring people out. So we definitely go there. We talk about all kinds of conflict, whether it be intrapersonal conflict or interpersonal conflict, you know, because the truth of the matter is conflict is a catalyst for change. So let's go there, right?
Absolutely.
I did write a book. It's called The Chosen Ones. It's an addict's guide to their true purpose. And I believe it's a really great book for not only people struggling with addiction, but also their families. And it gets a lot more in depth of the things that we've talked about here with much more substance.
So I may have missed it. Where can I get a copy of your book?
Oh, you can get it from Amazon. You can get it from Amazon. Yeah. And it's a little bit different. So, you know, I would love feedback. I'm always all about feedback, and we're here to learn together. We're here to grow together. We're all teachers and we're all students. So the more people that are on this quest of changing the stigma of addiction and really getting to the root, which I believe and you believe, Natashah, is spirituality. I think that when less people are afraid to talk about these particular topics, that's when the power is going to happen. That's when it's going to, you know,
it's going to blow up.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can please email me. My email is dr.nicouz as in zebra @gmail.com.
So say that one more time. It's so they get it.
Yes. dr.nic as in cat, ouz as in zebra @gmail.com.
All right, you guys, you've got Dr. Nicole Ouzounian's contact information. So if you want to have this conversation or you have maybe more questions after listening to our podcast today, please don't hesitate to reach out to her. Also, please check out her book called The Chosen One.
The Chosen Ones. Yep.
You can get that on Amazon. Again, Dr. Nicole Ouzounian, everyone. And also for anyone that wants to maybe reach out to me and give me any suggestions on other topics that you would love for Nicole and I to talk about here on our podcast, you are welcome to reach out to me at empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. Nicole, once again, it was a pleasure having you on here today. And for my listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in today. And I look forward to sharing another exciting topic and conversation with Dr. Nicole Ouzounian. And we hope that you guys tune in. Have a blessed one, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.